Hey everyone, how's it going? Welcome back to another Web Dev Junkie video. I hope you guys are having a great day. In this video, I just want to kind of talk about React and React hooks and how I personally think that they're pretty unintuitive, right? They're not really easy to understand as a beginner. And I've used Angular professionally in the past. I've used Vue and Svelte just on side projects. And out of all the four frameworks, Vue, Angular, Svelte, and what I miss? React. React is definitely the most confusing when it comes to like component state, especially if you're using like the functional components in the use state hook and use effect hook. And the reason for that is because I think React tries to take a mutable or immutable approach to data versus the other frameworks are just kind of imperative programming. If you have a variable, you just change it. And I definitely recommend you check out Svelte and Vue and just try playing around with it and see how easy it is to like change data on your component and have it reflect in the UI. But the whole point of this video is I just kind of want to walk you through from like a noob perspective why I think React is the most unintuitive when it comes to hooks and state and stuff like that. So let's just dive into it. We have a component here which just has an input box, and we are basically just listening for when the user types into the input. We want to keep track of the changes and keep that on a state variable, okay? So I brought in the use state hook. This is a hook you can use to basically keep track of some component state, and it's set to an object with name of Bob. So that's why you're seeing Bob show up in the input box, because we are setting the value equal to form.name. So one unintuitive thing in my opinion is when you call useState, it returns you an array, and you have to use ES6 like destructuring to get the variable and the setter. Off the bat, this is kind of strange that this returns an array instead of just like an object or something, but I'm not going to complain too much about that. But one thing you'll notice about this code is that when you call the onChange function, a noob might do this on accident and think that they can actually update their state. Okay, so in React, you can't actually modify the variable and expect it to update. If you're using the useState hook, you actually need to call the setter on it. Okay, so I've seen some people think that this will actually work, and in fact, this is why you can't type. Type into the input box, nothing happens. So a quick fix for this is obviously you call setForm, and then you could try to pass it form. But again, you try to type into the input box, it doesn't work. If you're a noob, you might be like, dude, what's going on here? Why is this not working? I'm calling setForm. And unfortunately, there's another unintuitive aspect to the setters of useState. You have to pass in a new reference to an object. All right, so a solution or a fix for that is typically you add a new parenthesis, or you add new curly braces, make a new object, and you do like a spread operator on the old object so that you create a new reference to an object. Okay, so now if I type into this, it's actually updating the state here. Okay, and so first off, if you're kind of unfamiliar with ES6, this could be kind of confusing and unintuitive. And secondly, what a lot of people do to kind of clean this up is they will just modify the key like this directly. Okay, so this is a working solution now. This works fine. We have an input box. We can type into it and keep check state. But I want to build upon this example to kind of highlight more issues I have with the useState hook and why it can be considered kind of unintuitive. All right, so let me just go ahead and point my app to an app1 component, and I'm going to refresh this page here. And I'm going to point out a couple things. So we have a basic form here that has a name and an email. And down here, we have something printing out if there's any errors on the form. So basically, after you click submit, we do some validation on the form. If any of these input boxes are not filled in, it's supposed to put an error message underneath them. And then also it's supposed to put a form level error message near the bottom above the submit button. So if I click it, notice that it only prints required under the email. It's supposed to put it under both. So we're going to kind of discuss why that's going on in a second. But what I'm going to also point out is if you click it twice, that is when the form has error message, which is here, shows up. So there's a couple of bugs with this, and the bugs are due to like using state improperly due to it being kind of unintuitive in my opinion. All right, so kind of take a step back. We have a form here, and when you submit the form, it calls an onSubmit method, okay? Basically what this is doing is it's looping through all of the form inputs, and it is checking to see if the value of that input is actually set. So did the user actually type into these input boxes? And we are basically updating an errors object with true and falses for like both of those inputs. And then after that, we basically check if any of those errors are set to true, then we, just set an object here. So set has errors is going to be a Boolean that's either true or false. And after we kind of set up the errors on all the inputs, we're checking to see if, any of them happen to be set to true. Okay, so first off, the main reason why the name is not showing required here is because the way we're calling set errors, we're actually taking like not the latest state of errors and splatting it every time. Okay, so one thing you can do in React is for the setter on use state, you can actually provide it a callback function. So I could say parentheses, I can say like error, and then I can return basically what the new state's going to be. So instead of using this top level errors, which could potentially be out of sync or could be an older version, we need to use the latest and greatest version here. So you can use this callback function to kind of fix that. And again, this is kind of confusing in my opinion. It's like, why don't you just use this all the time? And maybe that's a good practice, is to always use this callback function when you're dealing with setters for the use state hook. But now notice when I click submit, the required text pops under both the name and email. So we kind of fixed that issue. But now we have another issue where the actual like has errors is not showing up unless you submit it twice. All right. And so the main reason this is happening is because, again, we are computing the state based on the old version of errors. Okay. So errors is like version 0, but after this runs, we're calling set errors, which is going to be like an asynchronous call to update some state. And it might have, updated the errors object twice by then. So this is going to be an old version of errors, which is why it's not printing out true here, and it takes another submit. I don't know if I explained that correctly, but a quick fix for that is, one thing you could do is potentially use a use effect hook. Okay, so I'm going to say use effect and import that. And basically what I'm going to do here is I'm going to basically recompute the set has errors whenever the errors object has changed at all. Okay, so this should hopefully fix it. So the moment I click submit, this shows up. If I type in some values here, it goes away. So that works pretty good. But in my opinion, this was just like extra overhead just to get something simple going. If you're using like viewer svelte, this would have been straightforward, right? So a different solution, instead of using use effect, because I think this kind of muddies up your code, is you could have just created this errors object above. So I could say like const new errors is equal to an empty object. And then I could have just said like new errors of key is equal to not a form. Let me do this. All right, so basically I'm making a new object. I'm just attaching new properties to it based on if something is set with the validation or not. And then after I do all that logic, I can say set errors. I can pass it new errors. And then I could just move this up. Let me just go ahead and clean up some of this code and move this over so you can actually see everything. But instead of computing the set has errors with this, I could pass it new errors. Okay, so I'm going to basically do this. And now it works as, we want it to. You type in here and everything works fine. So this is kind of confusing too. Like I had to make a new object and, set some stuff up so I can call the setter here just so I can kind of use the latest and greatest version for set has errors. Now another solution, like if you wanted to do this, instead of having to do this here, you could have made this a constant. So I could say like const has errors and make this a function that returns this. Right? So I think this should, let me call it here. So instead of even using a state variable here, I could remove that. And now I think the same logic's going to happen. And if I were to click submit, everything shows up as it should. And if I click that, it works good. So notice what we did here is that this is a function that's kind of defined inside of the component itself. And whenever errors changes, this component is going to re-render itself. Okay, so that means it's going to redefine this function. And then when it computes it down here, this is going to be with the latest and greatest version of errors. Okay, so the point I'm getting at is, I don't know if I did a good job explaining it, but just to do something simple like this, you have to do a lot of you have to know how React really works under the hood. And in my opinion, that's not a good sign for using a framework. You shouldn't have to know how stuff is re-rendering under the hood to be able to efficiently use it. Like, really, you should just be able to set some state and change some state and have it show up in the UI. But there's like a lot of gotchas, in my opinion, when dealing with like the use state hooks and use effect hooks. And I'm not really sure what the proper way to do some of this stuff is. Like, I think this approach works pretty fine. The other approach worked pretty good too. Like if you just wanted to have a state variable up here to keep track of if the form has any errors or not. But yeah, I guess I'm just trying to say is that like as a beginner, don't be too discouraged, because even for me, like who's been using React for a while, like this stuff kind of trips me up. Like I constantly forget like, okay, this should probably be using like, the callback for set state now, because I'm doing it inside of a for loop and calling it multiple times. There's a lot of stuff to remember, and there's a lot of things that you need to understand about React under the hood to actually make sure that you're not like writing bugs. Another thing I want to talk about is like the use effect hook. Like it's so easy to write a infinitely recursive call with use effect if you're not careful. Like if you used use effect before, so let me just import that real quick. So use effect takes in a function, typically returns like a teardown function, but these brackets over here, you're supposed to provide the dependencies for your actual like hook callback function. Okay, so typically like if you were to do something like, I don't know, run that code, you'd want to put errors in your dependencies array. Okay, and if you're using like ESLint, typically they complain if you don't put that here. So if you just wanted a hook to run right when the component mounts, ESLint usually complains like about this if you leave this blank. You can see like if you highlight over this, it says use effect hook is missing a dependency, and this is due to exhaustive depths. So even like the use effect hook, to use it properly, like, and to not be doing something quote unquote improper or bad, you have to know even more about React and how it works behind the scenes and how it re-renders stuff. And I just think it's super unintuitive, to be honest with you all. Like try using Vue, try using Svelte, like that stuff just works out of the box. It's really intuitive, it's good to use. And in my opinion, React it's got some growing pains. It's got some learning curves to it. So at this point, I'm really just complaining. So yeah, I mean, be sure to leave a comment below if you think I'm just a noob and like this stuff is pretty easy to understand. But I'm telling you, like this stuff is not intuitive at all, and it's kind of frustrating to like know that React is like the #1 framework that everyone uses, and there's like a million different ways you can store state, but it's just not easy to use as a beginner. So if you are a beginner, don't feel frustrated if this stuff is hard, because it is hard. All right, thank you so much for listening to me rant about this. Hope you guys enjoyed this video and learned at least a thing or two about hooks and use state and React. Give me a thumbs up if you like this video, or give me a thumbs down if you don't like that I'm bashing React a little bit. Leave me a comment if you have suggestions, or if you've run into issues before with how like all this stuff needs to happen in a particular order, and like I don't know. And yeah, if you're new to this channel, be sure to give me a subscribe. Click that bell icon, because I'm going to be publishing other videos like this in the future. That should hopefully help you become a somewhat better React developer and a better web developer in general. All right, thank you so much for watching. Have a good day.